In conversations with Hegelians, I have quite regularly found that as soon as one touches on Hegelian premises, unless you accept his premises, that of course is perfectly true, but if the premises are wrong, everything that follows from them is wrong too. And a good ideologist has therefore to prevent the discussion of premises. In the case of Hegel, that is comparatively easy, because Hegel was a first-rate thinker and knew the history of philosophy, and if one wants to attack the premises of Hegel, one has to know their background in Plotinus and the Neoplatonic mysticism of the 17th century. Since very few people who pontificate about Hegel have any knowledge of the history of philosophy comparable to that of Hegel, the premises can be easily kept in the dark, and sometimes need not even be kept in the dark, because they are anyway in the darkness of the ignorance of those who talk about Hegel. In Marx the case is more obvious, because he greatly simplified the problem of the premises. When he writes of Hegel, he already distorts him so badly that his honest editors are very much aware of it and cannot help but express themselves cautiously on their finding. The editors of the Frühschriften of Karl Marx, especially Siegfried Landshut, say on occasion of their analysis of Marx's study of Hegel's philosophy of law that Marx, if one may express oneself in this manner, by misunderstanding Hegel as it were deliberately, conceives all concepts of Hegel, which are meant as philosophical predicates of the idea, as statements on facts. In my uncivilized manner, of a man who does not like to murder people for the purpose of supplying intellectuals with fun, I flatly state that Marx was consciously an intellectual swindler for the purpose of maintaining an ideology that would permit him to support violent action against human beings with a show of moral indignation. I have stated the problem explicitly inaugural lecture in Munich in 1958 and explored on that occasion the mental disturbance that lies back of such action. Marx, however, still is conducting his argument on a very high intellectual level, and the surprise caused by my flat statement that he was engaged in intellectual swindle with repercussions in the daily press can easily be explained on the same line as the darkness that surrounds the premises of Hegel. The Marxian swindle concerns the flat denial to enter into the etiological argument of Aristotle that is on the question that man does not exist out of himself but out of a divine ground of all reality. Again, as distinguished from the contemporaries who pontificate about Marx, Marx himself still had a very good philosophical education and knew that the problem of etiology in human existence was the central problem of a philosophy of man. And if he wanted to destroy man's humanity by making him a socialist man, quotation, socialist man, he had to refuse to enter into the etiological argument. On this point, he was, one must admit, considerably more honest than Hegel, who never quoted the arguments into which he refused to enter. But the effect is the same as in Hegel, because the contemporary critics know, of course, about Aristotle and the etiological argument of the metaphysics, just as much about the Neoplatonic background of Hegel, that is exactly nothing. The general deculturation of the academic and intellectual world in Western civilization furnishes the background for the social dominance of opinion which still would have been laughed out of court even in the late Middle Ages or in the Renaissance. When we go beyond Marx into the ideological epigonae of the late 19th and of the 20th century, we are already far below the intellectual level that formed even the background of a Marx. And here comes in my particular hatred of ideologies because of the vulgarization of the intellectual debate and a distinctly ochlocratic coloring of public discussion, which today has reached the point of considering as fascist or authoritarian even a reference to the facts of intellectual history, which must be known if one wants to discuss the problems that come up in the political debate. The radical condemnation of historical and philosophical knowledge must be recognized as an important factor in creating the social environment in which persons who cannot even be called intellectual crooks because their level of consciousness is much too low to be aware of their objective crookedness, but must be rather characterized as functional illiterates with a strong desire of personal aggrandizement. These observations then bring us down to the level of National Socialism. It is extremely difficult to engage in a critical discussion of National Socialist ideas, as I have found out when I gave my semester course on Hitler and the Germans in 1964 in Munich, because in National Socialist and related nationalist documents, we are far below the level on which rational discussion is possible. In order to deal with language documents of this type, one must first develop a philosophy of language, going into the problems of symbolization on the basis of experience and the perversion of such symbols on the Vulgarian level of people who are utterly unable to read a book on the level of philosophy. This level, which are characterized as the Vulgarian, and as far as it becomes socially relevant as the ochlocratic level, again is not admissible as in the position of a partner in discussion, but can only be an object of scientific research. These Vulgarian and ochlocratic problems must not be taken lightly. One could perhaps argue one should simply not take note of them. They are serious on the level of life and death, because the Vulgarians create and dominate the intellectual climate in which the rise of figures like Hitler to power is possible. I would say therefore that, in the German case, the destroyers of the German language and German philosophy, on the literary and journalistic level, characterized and substantiated by materials over more than 30 years in the volumes of Karl Krause, are the true criminals who are guilty of the National Socialist atrocities, which are possible only when the social environment has been so destroyed by the Vulgarians that a person who is truly representative of this Vulgarian spirit can rise to power. The motivations I have just referred to were perfectly clear to me at the time, but clarity about their direction did not mean clarity about the implications in detail. What one had to do was to explore the problems and in fact create the intellectual apparatus for the highly complex phenomena of intellectual deformation, perversion, crookedness, vulgarization, and so forth. And that required studies which at the time simply did not exist, so their necessity was felt on all sides. Into this context, for instance, belong the studies which are published under the title Die politischen Religionen in 1938. To speak of the politischen Religionen in that context, conformed to a class of literature which interpreted the new ideological movement as a variety of religions, and of authors like Louis Rougier, R-O-U-G-I-E-R, Louis Rougier, who published his successful volume La Mystique Politique. The classification is not wrong, but I would no longer use today the term religions because it is too vague and already deforms the real problem of experiences by bringing it down to the level of dogma or doctrine. Moreover, in that small volume on the politischen Religionen, I still treated on the same level such phenomena as the spiritual movement of Eknaton, of medieval theories of spiritual and temporal power, of apocalypse, the Leviathan of Hobbes, and certain National Socialist symbolisms. More adequate treatment would have required far-reaching differentiations between these various phenomena who were thrown together by me at that time still under the head of the Politischen Religion. The book was just finished printing in March 1938 when the National Socialist occupation of Austria occurred. The publishing house of Berman Fischer was an inevitable target, among others, of the occupation forces, and the whole edition was confiscated at the publishers and never reached the public. Later I found that a few copies had gone into commerce because apparently various National Socialist agencies got copies from the Gestapo, which after the Second World War entered commerce. The volume on the authoritarian state that was published in 1936 in Vienna was on the whole a piece of forced labor. I had been habilitated as a privatdozent for sociology and wanted to expand my venia legendi to political science. For that purpose I had to write a new book of an undoubtedly political science nature, and if possible on a subject related to Austrian politics. Material was there aplenty because in the 1930s the generally known resistance against National Socialism, the Civil War situation of 1934, the murder of Dollfuss, the creation of a corporate constitution, and so on all took place, and very suitable subject for treatment, since at that time nobody else paid any attention to these matters. The book is somewhat heterogeneous. In the first part, I dealt with the symbols total and authoritarian. Again, I should like to stress that at the time nobody else dealt with problems of this nature, and no intellectual apparatus for treating these topical terms much in use had been attempted. I developed on that occasion the distinction between political symbols and theoretical concepts, which I later further developed in my new science of politics into the distinction between topoi and concepts. This distinction is basic for an adequate treatment of the language problems in politics. Conventionally, whatever pops up as a language symbol in politics is simply accepted as such and enters the vague realm of political ideas. The first step in getting some rational order into this vague mass is to be clear about what constitutes theory, and that had already motivated my study of classical political philosophy, and in what way the concepts of theory differ from other language symbols which do not express the order of existence, but are expressive of various disorders and of the formations of concepts only half understood by the illiterates on the Bulgarian level.